All right, I think I'm live. So following up on my previous live session, I think it was a success because I managed to answer quite a few of your questions, particularly about the Amazon interview. So I thought I'd be doing another one today, into which I will again try to answer as many questions, if any at all. Probably also worthwhile noting here, for reference purposes, on the main reason why I'm doing these sessions is because, first of all, I receive a ton of questions, both in the comment sections of the video on YouTube, but also by email. And I find like this is one potential way that I could also maybe better structure the information. So this is the main reason for this. And I don't think it's worthwhile that anyone should book a coaching session with me or anyone else just to have their Amazon interview questions or whatever other interview questions just clarified. I don't find there is a lot of success with these things, and this is basically, I think this should be free content. So yeah, I see there's already some action going on here, which is always a good thing. Yeah, sure, you're welcome. So the main goal with this session is to answer as many questions as possible. Of course, there will be repetition between sessions and between videos. I've learned through time that it's always a good idea to over communicate these things. And also, I'm well aware that some of my videos that I've done 6 months ago are probably not of the best quality. So I'm also considering to maybe redo some of these videos in the near future, maybe for a broader audience as well. So, happy to hear. There are always people that are successful with their approach. So, yes, that's good to know, Mohib. So, I think this. At least the past week or so, I received at least one notification of someone who got hired. Either because of the videos, either because of my coaching. So that's always super exciting. I'm very thankful for that. And this is the best way to to send me your appreciations for these types of work. All right. So I think we have a question here. So the first one is if I can do a deep dive on the writing assignment. The writing assignment is something that my experience has shown that it's not always a good idea to design with other people. So it's always a good idea to design by yourself, to think about by yourself, and it comes in many different flavors. And actually, one of the first things that I remember about writing assignments is that they might come with a template, with a PowerPoint template, which, by the way, I know some of you will say that Amazon was supposed to ban those templates, but some presentations come in these templates. Some presentations don't have templates. Some presentations are for two main questions. Was the most innovative idea that you ever worked on, and another question which I cannot remember. So there's really a lot of variation on the types of presentations they ask you to do. But the main takeaway here is that the main reason why they do so is because, it should be said, there are people that speak better than others and people that write better than others. And it's very important. It's important for them to assess also your screening, your writing capabilities with these things. So that's why the writing assignment exists. So long you manage to communicate your idea concisely in a way that makes sense and in 2 or 3 pages, not more, I believe that will play to your advantage. Now, I've seen people who produced a writing assignment within 1 hour, and it sounded great, and English was not their first language. And I've seen people who spent 2 weeks on a writing assignment, In both cases, they got hired, but just to highlight here the things that the amount of time you spend varies widely on the job they're applying for, maybe also the seniority of your role, and essentially how familiar do you feel communicating in writing. And it's also a bit related with the job fit, because for example, if you've never worked in sales, but you're asked to produce more like a presentation that would require you to sell something, that obviously will take you a lot of time. So there's that about writing assignments. My experience has shown also that around 80% of the time, the best possible approach is to do it on your own. Like maybe take advice after it's done, take one or two feedback from your friends, but this is usually the way to go. Now, of course, if you get into trouble and if you're really not good at these things, better to maybe ask for help or see how you could better structure it, because probably most of the time the problem comes through the structure. But again, the main reason why they would want you to produce that written assignment in the first place is because they want to see how you write, the clarity of thought. I believe they also say this when they request you this. So long as you feel that's quantifiable, that's to the point, and it touches them on a business need, I think that would be a good presentation. So the second question here was, what are some recommendations for on-site interviews? Yeah, for on-site interviews, so congratulations for making it to the on-site interview, because not many people do. That's the first thing you should be aware here. The other thing that I see many people to underestimate with the on-site interviews is that you're actually in a very privileged position into which you can ask questions, many questions. And more often than not, I mean, I'm talking here about Amazon, but I'm sure others have too. Amazon has weekly or bi-weekly sessions into which you can ask questions. So I would definitely take advantage of those. Also, you have a main point of contact to whom you can ask as questions as well. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that more often than not, especially for jobs in the US, Amazon does not shy away to mention which of the principles are the most relevant for the role that you're applying for. I'm mainly talking here about the junior software development engineers, which more often than not, there are 4 leadership principles that apply, and apparently they are not always the same. And so it's definitely an advantage if you know the 4 out of 14 leadership principles that you must prepare out for such junior roles. For more senior roles or for mid to senior roles, there are almost all of them who matter the most. So I wouldn't even bother to query about this. Maybe it would make a bit more sense to ask which leadership principles are the more interesting for the job that you're applying for. The other question that you would want to ask your main point of contact is for some sample questions that they will ask during the interview. Because more often than not, they will share a question list with you if they want to. So this is, again, not set in stone. And I've seen, especially for software development engineers, they do not shy away to share the questions, a list of questions. And those behavioral questions are actually framed quite interestingly. They are in... I was actually surprised myself on how long they are and how at times complicated they are to understand in the first place. So I would definitely ask for these 2 pieces of information, which leadership principles and sample questions list. Also, in some cases, they will share the names of the people that will be interviewing you, although I didn't find this especially relevant, especially for junior to mid-level roles. For senior roles, yes, then it gets a bit more exciting there, but still, I didn't see this as a game changer. Maybe to identify the bar raiser, which, by the way, the bar raiser is usually not part of the team that you're applying for. So yeah. So how do you prepare for an on-site interview? Well, I made a video about how do you prepare about this, and it has structured advice on how do you go about it. So I think it will take me half an hour here to properly explain all the steps, but I would definitely recommend you to take a look at that specific video for more information. Ooh, so we have some action here. So I'm going for an on-site for an entry-level cloud support role. I was told there would be 4 interviews, 2 technical, 2 behavioral. I'm lost on what I can prepare for the next few days. Well, why don't you ask them? So this is what I just said. Like, you should always ask them specifically what types of leadership principles would apply, samples of questions, and if not, you can always start. Given it's an entry-level role, you could always start preparing with the 35 most commonly asked questions to see how you would react to those. But you should also prepare your stories for an entry-level role between 5 to 10 different stories that you could use to answer questions. And essentially, test yourself, role play with someone to see how you would speak your answers in a star format. So, what are your recommendations for BA interviews? I believe that question is a bit general. So if you could make it a bit more specific, Fahmi, maybe I could answer it. Is the phone interview the same as the on-site interview? No, it's not the same because, first of all, there are usually 2 phone interviews, one more general by nature and one more specific. It is true that recruiters do test you for some leadership principles in some phone interviews, but so from that point of view, yes, there is some similarity. But from everything else, there isn't a lot of similarity because, first of all, in a phone interview, you speak by phone. There's no visual contact, and on-site there is. And there's a huge difference between how you speak an answer by phone and how you speak it in person, as is when you draft it. So for a phone interview, I would recommend you to prepare using the most commonly asked questions, assuming you already have those 14 leadership principles well understood. Whereas for the on-site interview, I would very much encourage you to go one step further and find the questions for each of the 14 leadership principles and prepare answers for them, on top of preparing 2 stories for each of the 14 leadership principles. I'm assuming you're considering a mid to senior role here. If you're considering a more junior role, then there are only 4 leadership principles. So I would only prepare for those, and I would, of course, find them out at first. Thank you, Parviz, for the compliments. I would request if you can also hit on how the interviews are evaluated, as the panel of all interviewers have a brief about the candidate, mainly identifying leadership principles. How the interviews are evaluated. Mohib, I would assume. Yeah, so Mohib. Asking a question for solution architect. Yeah, so mainly identify. So how the interviews are evaluated. So I can only speak here about the behavioral part, right? For the behavioral part, you will be evaluated on those leadership principles. And I'm assuming you're talking about the on-site interview. Yes, because, yeah. So for the on-site, you will be evaluated on those principles and you will be scored on those principles. And the interviewer is supposed to take a lot of notes, with, I would assume, including the stories that you're using, because one of the things they'd be interested in is to see how diverse are your stories as well. But essentially, that's why I recommend people to prepare specifically on the leadership principles, because they tend to score you on this. And it's not just, this is not an Amazon thing, but this is how behavioral interviewing works. So they have something that's called, I believe, a behaviorally anchorated scale or something like this. I cannot remember the precise naming. So basically, they would decide how to score on a given hiring process for any role. They would define this in the beginning. They would define the questions. They would define the order of the questions that would get asked during the interview. And basically, the on-site would be just the execution of that strategy for any interviewer. So given the fact that they would have these things set up well in advance, you can imagine there is certain amount of rigidity during the on-site interview. So they will ask you some predefined questions, and they will follow up with questions that would allow them to further assess you, score you for that given leadership principle. Now, also worthwhile noting here is that while the overall feeling during the on-site interview is friendlier, the one with the bar raiser is more formal than informal. So, but as far as I know, the goal is the same, to score you, to rate you on those leadership principles, and well, see whether you're a good candidate, you're a good leader. So these are how they would go about it. Now, when it comes to identifying the leadership principles, something that came to my mind today while coaching someone was that it's not of essence that you mention the leadership principle by name. Actually, I found that many interviewers reference the leadership principle by name in their question. So they ensure the candidate understand which leadership principle they're talking about. But this being said, is not a rule. So this only some happens sometimes. But what is important is that you understand the behavior exhibited in the leadership principle. Once you exhibit that behavior, you will be able to basically improve your chances, score more points, essentially for that specific question. Usually, I found my information shows that there are a couple of leadership principles who get tested in each of these on-site sessions, for instance. So if you would have 5 of them, maybe one of them would be the presentation, and the other 4 would test for around 8 other leadership principles, and maybe 2 of them would get tested during a second phone interview. So there you go, 10 leadership principles for a mid to senior role. Of course, leadership principles get tested better by the seniority of the role, and also by the type of role you're applying for. Like I said previously, an SDA would only get tested for around 4 leadership principles, whereas a principal consultant would get grilled on these leadership principles. So this is how interviews are evaluated. So it is a bit more analytical than a behavioral interview would sound, but still, I believe it's an efficient way to do interviews. And what is your brief suggestions for a control systems engineer role? I mean, for on-site interview. Find out what is the most interesting information for your role. Are you applying for a junior or senior role? If it's a senior role, then most likely all leadership principles would apply. And try to find questions and try to draft your answers to those questions, and then go ahead with role playing those. Control systems engineer sounds like very technical, so I would expect less than 50% to be behavioral. So yeah, you should prioritize your time accordingly here. So I'm having an interview for the role of data engineer. I'm on final round of interview. Please suggest some important points. Well, everything that I just referenced throughout this video, I believe, applies to your role. So basically, find out as much information as you can about what to prepare for that. Try to diagnose whether it's a junior or senior role, to identify which leadership principles would make the most sense, and try to split your preparation for the behavioral part, 50% of the time to invest to writing those answers and preparing stories for the principles, and the other 50% to role play them, because there's a huge difference between a written one and spoken one. And by the way, data engineers, for some reason, tend to memorize things more often than others. Memorize behavioral answers. Don't do that. It's a bad strategy. Just an advice. I mean to say, should I prepare more for technical or for behavioral questions? Yes, you should prepare more for I would assume it's business analyst role. Yes, for a business analyst role, I would assume that it would be more behavioral than anything else. But this being said, I would need a job description. I would need a lot more information from you to be able to assess which leadership principles make the most sense. Unless, of course, your point of contact there would be able to share more information with you, with most of the cases. Would you mind elaborating on how to answer how you customize a user experience? That's a technical question. I mainly focus on the behavioral ones, and yours, Andre. That's a. I mean, I don't understand how this is a behavioral question that asks for a situation that you did in the past in order to predict your future performance on the job. So I don't think that's something that I could help you with. What are the hints I should look for successful interview experience after attending the loop? Fahmid, my friendly advice would be not to look for such clues, because I just had someone who I coached for quite a few, and as soon as they got out of the interview, they wrote me an email. Dan, the interview. I mean, I think there are only 3% chances that I would ever get selected after my interview, because it went terribly wrong, or so they said. And then they got the job offer the next day. So don't look for clues here. Just try to do your best during the interview, and then just wait and see what happens. I don't. The Amazon interview is built around false positives. So how you feel it went is not necessarily an indicator of how it really went, right? And this is particularly true for more senior roles. Junior roles, I believe it becomes obvious very quickly, but for senior roles, it's even more interesting. I am considering a level 7 manager role and would like to understand number of loops like HR, system design, soft skills. For a level 7 manager role, I would expect it to be pretty behavioral. But this being said, there are project management roles which are technical and non-technical. If it's non-technical, they will grill you on behavioral questions, like 80% of the time. If it's a technical one, I would say only 60% of the time, or this is what my experience shows. But for L7, they should be quite good communicators in terms of what to expect there. So why don't you follow up with them as well? You mentioned an on-site interview video earlier. I can't seem to find it. Yeah, for how to just search how to prepare for the Amazon on-site interview. It's published within the past 3 months. Yeah, 3 months or so. Could you give me some insights about QA engineer role in Amazon? What points would you suggest me to concentrate more? I wouldn't think the main highlight of a QA engineer is behavioral, unless we're talking about a senior role. So there's that. I mean, I believe it's on the same lines with the SD role, but I wouldn't be able to tell you. To be honest with you, I never coached, so I never received feedback from a QA engineer that applied there. Could you please elaborate what you mean by memorize? Could you tell from how the job description whether the role is L4 and L5? They mentioned they want 3+ years of experience rather than 2. So first of all, what you mean by memorize? Why memorizing is a bad idea, although it doesn't look like, and it's even recommended by some sources. The problem with memorizing answers to behavioral questions is that you will eventually master those answers, but the problem is those questions will never be the same, asked in the same way during the interview. And when they ask you the question in a different way, chances are you won't remember your answer, and you will basically loop and try to find it. And okay, let's say even if you find an answer, even if the question has slightly changed, but what if they ask you a different question? You will start looping through your prepared answers. You will only find that you don't have an answer after 30 seconds or so. when it's already too late. And now good luck finding another answer, which you basically didn't memorize. So basically, the problem with memorizing things is that as soon as you'll find something that you haven't prepared for, it will be extremely hard to come up with something of decent quality, not of high quality. And when I'm saying this, I'm saying from feedback from other people that they said, oh yes, I shouldn't have memorized anything for these things. And there is another argument here with memorizing things, that some people tend to memorize the leadership principles, and that's again a huge mistake, because what matters in those leadership principles is the behaviors exhibited into each of them. So if you memorize them, it doesn't mean you understand anything about them. So if you memorize them, then you're going to use keywords or the leadership principles throughout your answers, instead of focusing your answers to primarily make sense, which is again a big mistake, because if the answer doesn't make sense, you can tell me like 10 times it's about customer obsession, ownership, and dive deep. If I don't understand your answers, I won't buy into what you have to say. So these are only a few of the reasons why memorizing things does not making sense. Now, with respect, could you tell from the job description whether the role is, which level is? No, you cannot say this from the job description. Like, it's a very unreliable source, even if they say 3+ years of experience. And also, it's not once that I heard that they change the level of the role because of the candidate would either fit into a lower or higher level role. So I don't see much at stake. But anyway, I wouldn't be able to tell you. So it is my first interview with Amazon for network engineer position. I can do preparation of technical, but behavioral seems more difficult than technical. Don't know how much leadership skills they are expecting. More of a tech guy. What do you suggest for this? Scorpion, first of all, prepare stories. Prepare 2 stories for each of those 14 leadership principles. I would assume you're applying for a senior role or a mid-senior role here. So prepare 2 stories for each of the 14 leadership principles, 2 different ones, and basically you're going to end up with around 20, or between 15 and 20 stories. Like 2 times 14 is 28, but because of some overlap there will be, you'll end up with 15 to 20 different ones. Then what you should do here is to find questions for each of those principles and try to answer them in a star format using the stories that you first prepared. And once you have answers to those stories, then try to role play with someone. That is, find someone to ask you questions, and you will provide them with answers. And your answers must make sense in the first place. They must be quantifiable. They must be in the star format, and there's a lot more that I'm sure you can find out by watching either a few of my videos, either just Googling for information how to answer behavioral questions. But the key point here is to prepare those stories and then to go with questions that are laser focused on the leadership principles. If this is a more junior type of role, there will be only a handful of leadership principles. But if it's more senior, all leadership principles apply. So this is how you prepare for the behavioral interview, with the note that you would want to spend 50% for coming up with 2 stories, preparing written answers to questions, and the other 50% to role play. So it's that important to have leadership skills at Amazon in the interview. And you should only read those principles, because I believe 11 of the 14 starts with leaders. So yes, it is important. So I would take it accordingly. Hopefully this is useful. Could you please give me a guideline as to what would be a within limit when it comes to ask for information about the company? Well, the limit is the one you feel the most comfortable with. I mean, there's nothing wrong asking them for examples of questions that you might get asked, and for the leadership principles that are the most important for the role. Also, there's nothing wrong with asking them who will be interviewing you. So these are the most commonly asked questions. So if you have others, just use common sense. If 2 different interviewers ask the same question, should I reply with same sample situation or different sample situations? How would you tackle the question of why you want to, yeah. So the first part, if they ask the same question, which is not unheard of, but quite unlikely, I wouldn't use the same answer, because most likely they are tasked to screen you for different leadership principles. So they why would they employ two people to screen you for the same thing? So you should understand the nuance of that question and try to give a different example for the second time. But again, this is a very exceptional scenario, and like from my experience, I've heard of it once, maybe twice, but this wasn't one of the main challenges for for an on-site interview. I would assume here. So so long as you prepare 2 stories for each of the 14 leadership principles, and then you also prepare to answer questions specific to leadership principles, I think you would have enough diversity to come up with 2 different answers for the same question. Or I've even heard of people saying during the interview that, hey, in the 5th round or in the 4th round, they said, hey, you know what, I previously used this story with another interviewer. Can you give me another question to be able to find another stories, which is also possible, although I wouldn't recommend. From experience, this happens for bad reasons. But there is also this extreme possibility. So yeah, basically anything would work. Ideally, it would be a different one. Otherwise, you should ask them for another question, but never say you have no idea. So this is what matters. How would you tackle the question of why would you want to move to another country? Interesting question. Actually, I mean, I would assume that you would want to move there because the job is better remunerated, maybe, or maybe you have family there, or maybe the job is very exciting for this reason for you. I think you should. I mean, you should be straightforward with them. I mean, I didn't hear this question getting asked, and it's not a behavioral question in the first place. So, but a true, a genuine answer would work. I mean, why wouldn't it work? I don't see this as a trick question by any means. What are the 4 leadership principles for junior role for technical guy? So I said in the beginning of the video that they actually depend. So I did mention a few. I did mention one scenario in one of my videos, but then I got observations that is not always the case. So you should definitely ask them for which 4 leadership principles are the most relevant, because at least in the US, they do share this information. And furthermore, they even share the questions, samples questions that might get asked. They would send you a list with 60 questions or so, but still, it would give you more a better idea on how these things would work. How to tell if a role is a senior level role or an entry level role by title? Actually, this is an interesting question, because you cannot really tell. I mean, one way to tell is from your basic requirements, numbers of years of experience. The other way you could guess, make an educated guess, is if you look on the right at the similar roles. Would those be senior ones, or would they be junior ones? And usually, if you really have no idea how senior they would be, they are mid-level roles. So but usually if they don't say it, and they almost never say it, they rarely say it's a senior role, and they do say it's a junior role quite often. But for mid, I believe they don't even have anything such as mid to senior roles. Or another way, now if I think about it, if you could locate this job by its ID on other places, such as on LinkedIn. I think on LinkedIn there is a field mentioning if it's a mid-level or senior level role. So if you take the ID and search it through LinkedIn and you find it there, then I think it's written there. If I remember correctly, they have a field for this. After the on-site interview rejection, what are the chances for getting a chance second interview in the future? Actually, they are quite good. So unless you've done a terrible job during your on-site interview and they say, please don't apply for 6 months or please don't apply for 1 year, your chances to get a call back from them are quite good. And I've heard many people receive the call back after 3 months asking them to come in for the on-site interview for the same job. But what's more interesting here is that you can apply it for multiple roles still, and you are considered for multiple roles. As far as I can recall, the dashboard allows you to see your applications as in progress or for which you're no longer considered. So from this point of view, sure, why not? Unless you get a no. All right, I heard they do a call with the recruiter before the loop to walk you through the job compensation and compensation. Do you know if they do that these days as well? Yes, they do it. The more senior the roles, the better the probability they will do a 1 hour such free coaching session if you want. However, from experience, for some reason, they're not sharing as too many details about these things, or at least I didn't receive a lot of positive feedback with this feedback. Or I should say, they also offer free coaching calls, free calls every week or 2 calls per week, into which I've been told you could also ask your questions. Now, what's the quality of these? You should go check this out. Maybe it's really good. Who knows? But again, the more senior role, the higher the probability they would offer 1 hour of such free calls, into which you would basically get answers to your questions. So the reason is not family, but if I generally mention the reason to be remuneration, won't they think I might leave their company as soon as someone is? I don't think they think this way. And listen, I mean, money could be a reason. I mean, let's be honest here. Amazon is a huge company, and they have many places where they build location there for cost efficiency reasons. So I mean, this is business, So I don't think you should shy away from mentioning this. It's often, you see, my experience has shown that it's often how you say it what matters, not what you say, with these types of situations. So I would spend some time to frame my answer, and I would definitely have something prepared for this in any case. All right, so I answered quite a few questions as well today. So actually quite confident these sessions are useful to clarify some of your questions. Something else I had noted here to ensure that I would mention is that if you're applying for AWS and for a non-technical management role, you should know that there is no such thing as a non-technical role within AWS. So you should expect questions about AWS, even technical questions about AWS, even if you're applying for a non-tech position. And this should give you an idea on the level of preparation that you should consider, especially for these types of positions. All right. So if anyone has any more questions, please do let me know. Could they ask questions you couldn't answer in a telephonic interview? Well, if you don't have an answer, then it's a question you cannot answer. But no, I mean, I'm speaking here for the behavioral part. The behavioral questions are designed in such a way that anyone has an answer for them. The challenge here is how quickly can you come up with an answer, with a great answer. And this is very, very dependent on the level of preparation that you have with these things. For example, someone coming from management consulting will always have an answer. The challenge is how good will be the answer. For a highly technical person, it's not that straightforward. So you should spend time to cover scenarios and all the stuff to become good answering behavioral questions. For the technical part, of course, there are questions you cannot answer, but still you should relentlessly focus on trying to answer those questions, because more often than not, if you think about it, you will find satisfactory answers, or you could at least reassure them that this is one Google search away, into which you could also make an interesting point there with the usefulness of their question in the first place. So these are, so for example, if they would ask you how much revenue did Amazon have last year, that's one Google search away. So that wouldn't be a relevant question to assess your level of expertise, except if you would be applying for a financial analyst role where you should have done your work. But more often than not, you should really go above and beyond to try to answer those questions. The behavioral ones are designed in such a way that everyone has an answer for them. Anything you would want to share about salary negotiation or go with Glassdoor? No, I don't do salary negotiation at all. Does bar raiser always focus on ownership? Not really, no. So bar raisers could focus on any topic that they want. I've even heard, most commonly speaking, they would want to focus on negative stories, such as tell me about the time when you failed, because these are the questions that many people struggle to properly answer. But ownership is one of the least complex domains or leadership principles that I know. So I don't think that would be a main highlight. Should we rely on online pay scale? I have very little experience about these things. Does Amazon rely on ATS for screening candidates? Yes, they do rely on an applicant tracking system. They used to use Glassdoor, but not Glassdoor, iSIMS. But I think they have developed their own meanwhile. I haven't really checked things in details, but definitely they use an applicant tracking system, and definitely use algorithms to match candidates with roles, and they definitely use technology for these things. Actually, how I found about the Amazon interviewing process is because I was involved in the applicant tracking business previously, and Amazon's hiring process was so structured, and it was actually managed by another applicant tracking system called iSIMS, and that was kind of the Rolls Royce of applicant tracking systems, and that's how I found about them, and that's how it caught my attention specifically. So yes, they are a very, very data-driven company, and basically the hiring process is one that makes the most sense, as you would expect, because of the scale of the company. So yes, applicant tracking system is, and great resumes tend to have a higher pass rate, from my experience, and but I couldn't correlate a greater pass rate from a great resume with a job offer from Amazon. So there's that. What are some good questions to ask for an AWS interview? Goal-driven questions. How would you define success for my role? You would also want to see whether if it's a new or a replacement role, but the way you would ask this would have to be framed more intelligently. If you want, I think within the past 15 videos, at least one of them, if not two of them, touch upon the main. I believe the last video that I published is with the top 10 questions to ask in an Amazon interview. And in that video description, if you want, there's a link to another one that gives, I believe, 40 examples of questions you could ask in an Amazon interview. But mainly you would want to ask them goal-driven decisions to understand the business there. This is what they would appreciate. So don't ask vague questions. This would be my advice. Do they search for candidates on LinkedIn, for example, or mainly they are focused on people who apply by themselves? Both. They do search, they do screen many people from LinkedIn. They also published most of their jobs on LinkedIn, so definitely a place to consider applying on if you wanted to. Now, whether if it's better as compared to applying on your own, I wouldn't be able to tell you this, although probably I would directly apply from their website because you wouldn't give away the source of the application. And to be honest, I'm not good friends with LinkedIn. I just anonymize my profile. So I cannot really recommend LinkedIn by any means, but definitely do a lot of screening through LinkedIn. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. When we answer behavioral questions we've prepared, is it better if we act like we haven't prepared? So there is a bit of truth here that if you act, the better you act, if you know how to act, it's probable that your answers will be interpreted in a slightly different way. And the way that I learned about this is while coaching some people who can hardly speak English, to be honest with you, applying for US roles, got hired. And during my coaching sessions, I was surprised that, I had to make them repeat 3 times their answers simply because I couldn't understand them. And when they got a job, I was like, wow, like there must be something wrong with my thinking. And actually, I was underestimating the level of the amount of importance it had, the actual acting had over this process. So imagine this: if you would spend more time, if you would struggle to answer a question because English is not your primary language, you would actually struggle finding some words. But the reality is that you will get more time to think about the answers for those questions. So by finding those specific words, your answer will sound actually much better. You'll be evaluated as a much better candidate than someone who speaks fluent English but maybe did not make the best employment of words. So I know it might sound counterintuitive, but there is a certain amount of truth in the sense that if you know how to role play these things, the chances to score better in Amazon interview is clear. And I've also noticed this, on the more serious side of things, people that I coach for longer periods of time, for upwards of 10 hours, but I'm talking here about super senior roles, have developed a skill in answering the behavioral question, not one that's new to them, but ones that they refreshed. So in other words, they haven't been doing this for 10 years. And if you do it for a long time, you become very good not only at speaking your answers, but at acting your answers and at really making a point. And I'm mainly talking here about bankers and people from the banking industry where, you learn how to speak. So maybe if you leave the industry, I don't know, you make your own startup. And then after 5 years, you realize, hey, I want a job at Amazon because maybe my startup didn't work out as I wished. Then, yes, I noticed that acting does make a difference, but especially for senior roles here. The other argument was for junior roles, of course. Oops, where was I? So I will be appearing for a split loop between 2 teams for level 7. Is the key to share inclination with one team over other? I don't see how this would make a difference. I mean, basically your goal is to put together a great show, so how would that be different? What's the best way to tackle a situation where you're not able to answer a technical question, even if you have mentioned it as your expertise? Because sometimes in interviews you get nervous. It happened with me in the telephonic rounds. Well, basically, the most basic way you would want to win time there, and by the way, the strategy is always to win time to properly brainstorm for the question. If you think you have a fair shot, if you have no idea what that means, then probably say it out loud. You'd have no idea, especially for the technical part. But if you want to win time, one way to win time would be to repeat the question. One such question that I remember is one guy was asked, how would you perform a certain command on a Cisco router? What's the command to do this on a Cisco router? And uh, he said, then I have no idea what's the command there because we don't use Cisco routers. We use the other brand of routers. And I said, okay, but if you use the other brand of routers, then you should tell them that, hey, I do this all day long, but I do it for a different brand because this is my job. This is what my job requires. But if you want, I think this is one Google search away. So this is not something indicative of my performance on the job. So by this, you show them that you have the proper expertise and you are genuinely interested in the job, because an unprepared candidate would say, I don't know, sorry. I don't know, I don't use these routers. See, which would be very different from when answering a question, from saying that, hey, I use these routers because these are my day-to-day job. However, I could easily refresh my memory through a Google search. So it's a positive approach. So for the technical part, if you have no idea, I would say that you have no idea. But if you believe that you have a fair shot here, try to win time. Try to debug the question. Try to ask them a few more questions, maybe to have a better grip on that question, and eventually to come up with an answer. It doesn't have to be perfect, but still it will be much better seen as if you would say directly, I have no idea, when you could have had some idea. Oh, Vladi, always nice to hear from you. And by the way, congratulations, Vladi. What are some of your advices for the day of the on-site interview? Yeah, definitely don't go in there tired. That's a very important piece of advice, because there's going to be 5 hours of grilling. So in 5 hours, unless you can perform, it will not play to your advantage if you prepared only the night before. So if Red Bull works for you, yes, definitely, why not? But otherwise, I wouldn't risk myself if you're not used with these things, with some caffeine and stuff like that. But basically, go prepared. I mean, go prepared. Go with a fresh mind, I should say. Most likely, if they haven't told you so, you won't be allowed with cheat sheets, but you could print out some questions for them, just so you could double check them between sessions. You could also print out some other information that you could check out if you have breaks within those sessions. The dress code at Amazon, I would assume, is very informal, so dress accordingly, and that's basically it. Oh, Vladi, thank you very much for recommending me. I heard presentation are banned in Amazon. They asked me to prepare a case study. Should I use the presentation as a medium? Also, would they mind if I present a case study from my current project? Presentations are not banned at Amazon. PowerPoint, there was a saying that PowerPoint presentations are banned, but they are not banned. So presentations, in fact, are part of the Amazon. So 6-page narratives and stuff like this is actually super common. So presentations are very important at Amazon. PowerPoint presentations are not something they used to like, but they seem to be liking them more and more these days. For AWS on-site interview, as a gesture for thanks for inviting for on-site interview, I took a gift like chocolate. This could have affected the hiring or rejected. Yeah, I think they could have rejected you because of this sole reason. I mean, if you read on their jobs website, they don't even allow cover letters. So I don't think that's a smart idea. Will they think I'm breaching the code of conduct by sharing my current project flow, not the actual figures? Well, I would assume that's not private, that's not confidential information in the first place. If it wouldn't be, then you can share whatever you want, whatever makes sense. In that thing, just with pending projects, there is a possibility that you won't be able to focus on results. So if you do so, just try to think in advance how you would focus on the results, because if you don't know the results, I'm not sure how that would make sense. Also, does it look awkward to take notes during the interview? Why would you take, it's not the first time I get this question, but why would you take notes during the interview? I mean, they are asking you questions, not you asking them questions. If you are mentioning when you ask them questions to take your notes, yes, I think you could. Why not? What are good questions to ask at the end of a telephone screening interview? Salak, so if you want, take a look at my previous video. It's with the top 10 best questions to ask at the end of an interview. And if you want more, I think in the video description I placed a link to another video into which I give around 40 examples of such questions. So definitely be on the lookout there. In short, ask common sense questions, questions that make sense, business questions, make them understand that you understand the business that they're into, and you want to be part of it. So this is how you would go about the questions that you would want to ask them. Whew. So this took a while. All right, so we're approaching the hour here. So please do let me know if you happen to have any other questions. I see there are not many questions about actually answering behavioral questions, which I found the most challenging part of the behavioral interview. So probably many of you focus too much on the theory when compared to practice. Like, for example, how do you answer the failure story? How do you answer, tell me about your weakness, or tell me about your strength? Or how do you go about answering, tell me about yourself? Like, it's not unusual for someone to spend days to prepare just the failure stories. So maybe consider this while preparing for them. Fahmid, I'm not really sure what you mean by that. I'm not sure by using cue cards during interviews while they ask me questions. You mean you using those cards? I don't think they would allow you to use such thing. I mean, they do in some instances, but that's usually when they only allow you with cards if they call you for an on-site interview on very short notice, into which they would allow you with one page of notes. So this would be the only scenario where this could be acceptable. So as I earlier said, like the main challenge with these behavioral interviews is to properly find proper answers and to speak them. This is by far, you're welcome, Famine. This is by far the most challenging element of the behavioral interview, and trust me when I tell you that it's of very little significance on finding lists with questions when compared to actually preparing answers for them and actually role-playing them in real life, and even further than this with follow-up questions. So these are, if you're watching it right now or later on, you should be well aware that these are the real challenges for the behavioral interviews. It's only that much about crawling the internet for clues, for tips and tricks, and it's very much about hard work with these things. So usually for the on-site interview, you want to prepare for 2 weeks, and it's not unheard of to prepare for 4 weeks or even more, just for the behavioral part. Now, including the technical part, it's not unusual that people prepare the whole summer for these things. So preparation is quite essential for them, and I'm only talking here about the on-site, but also for the telephone screening interviews. it's essential that you refresh your tell me about yourself or why Amazon, or even the strengths and weaknesses. And with the tell me about yourself, this is one of the first questions that I do during my role plays for telephone screening interviews. Is what I find in 90% of the cases that people tend to present the same information that's already available in their CV, which, by the way, the interviewer also has while asking me this question. So it's not a compelling answer. How do you make it more compelling? Well, you can make it more compelling by, first of all, focusing on your strengths. You should think, what is my core strength when applying for this role? Why can I make a difference there? And then when you go with your experiences, of course you could say what you worked on, but where you worked, but just briefly, and just focus on something that differentiates you, some of the main highlights from your career, and present them in a more concise manner. This way you can differentiate yourself and eventually start a conversation with your interviewer, which you always want to do in a job interview. The better the conversation, the better the chances that you will advance to the next step, especially in a behavioral interview. So these tell me about yourself would be something that you definitely want to prepare in advance. Not to talk about why Amazon. Why Amazon is actually one of the most viewed videos on this channel, and there is some good amount of information there. But basically, it's about templating it. Like, I want to work at Amazon for 3 reasons. The first reason is usually that everyone praises Amazon, but you should know that this is not a differentiator. This is something just common, maybe too common in some places, maybe too common for some people to even consider mentioning this reason. But the second one would be, how can I differentiate myself from others while applying for this role? And this is where it gets interesting. How can you differentiate yourself from others? Here, what's your unique value proposition? Think about it. And the third one is, what's in for you from this job? Why you? Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And these are the types of things that you would want to prepare when doing why Amazon. And it's very, very important. And as I will say it once more, people spend days to prepare one answer for such questions. All right. If your behavioral rounds questions goes really well, can it make up for some technical questions? Sure, yes. So if you only look at in the comment sections of some of my videos, there are people saying that they didn't shine in the technical part, but they did shine in the behavioral part, and they got hired. And people openly admit that this could make a difference. This doesn't make the difference. So you must be skilled technically, and you must be doing a really good job behaviorally. But it does matter. The behavioral part will always matter in an Amazon interview. They sent me a list of interviewers, and they specifically mentioned hiring manager in front of one of the names. Do I need to take special care with him about my interview? If that person will not be part of your team and is not the one who designed the hiring process, then most likely that is the bar raiser. So yes, maybe, but not necessarily. So yeah, let me reread this. And they specifically mentioned hiring manager in front of one of the names. No, I wouldn't put too much emphasis there. Yes, if they had most of experience, if they have a lot of experience at Amazon, then yes, definitely they could be. That's a good predictor of them being the bar raiser. Yes, so yeah, that's a reliable indicator. Although, to be frank here, for some senior roles there are 2 bar raisers, so he might not be the only one, if you wanna put it this way. So as I was previously saying here, like, you should be really serious about preparing. Tell me about yourself, why Amazon, tell me about the time when you failed, what's your strength, what's your weakness, and these types of general questions that are not necessarily behavioral ones, but these are questions that could essentially put you together in a great spot from the beginning. So yeah, well, if if he's not at Amazon, that yeah. So if he doesn't have such long track of experience at Amazon, that maybe he's less likely to be a bar raiser. But it might also be that they just put the hiring manager there because they just put it there. So it might just be a label that they left there. So I wouldn't say it. I wouldn't. I mean, they wouldn't tell you who is the bar raiser prior to the interview. I know this is not public information, and they actually have videos on Amazon's channel talking about bar raisers. But the only useful information that I found from there is that they are not from your team. So that's the essential way to spot them. All right, so already over an hour, and I think I covered quite a few questions today. So definitely, also I consider this session a success. So thank you very much to everyone for tuning in, and I'll be sure to continue with these live streams in a very, very near future. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good one.